Welcome everyone to another episode of Voices for Tibet. On this new TCF video series, we are trying to capture the voices of people who support Tibet, Tibetan culture, even the education of Tibetan children in exile. Today, I'm really pleased that I have another TCF supporter and sponsor, Jim Patton, with us. I met Jim, I want to say like 2 years ago when we met in Ladakh. The amazing Jennifer Prue sort of connected us together. And since that trip, Jim has just been a wonderful friend and supporter for TCF and for Tibet. And so today I'm really happy that Jim is with us as a voice for Tibet. So welcome, Jim. And can I begin this by requesting you to tell our audience just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jim Patton, and I own a business called RealWorks Therapy. I focus on providing orthopedic massage and manual therapy, helping people get out of acute and chronic pain. Aside from that, I'm also a yoga instructor, and I teach Qigong and Yang style Tai Chi, among other things, and try to stay pretty active and looking forward to the restrictions of COVID dropping so that it can actually come back to the Ladakh region and maybe even get into Tibet at some point.
Right. So, Jim, I know that, with all these activities around you, you are a pretty busy man. So thank you again for being on the program. But my mind first with you goes back to Ladakh, to that wonderful trip that we did together. And I just wanted to live with you again. What were some of the imagery, some of the memories from that wonderful trip that you sort of took back with you to California?
Well, so getting a chance to visit the Tibetan monasteries that are throughout that region was a big plus. Getting a chance to actually meditate with the monks as well too. Getting a better understanding of Tibetan Buddhism in that region, as well as the history and the migration out of Tibet and into that area. Getting a chance to just be exposed to the Tibetan culture as well. It was nice to eat Tibetan food as well as to spend time with Tibetan families. The guides we had were great. I got to, it was just all around. It was a great trip. It was nice to actually be in parts of the world where you couldn't use a cell phone any longer. It was nice to really be disconnected for a while, and and get a chance to participate in a quieter lifestyle. I mean, it's not. What I liked about the region was that it's not nearly as noisy and chatty as the Western world.
True. That is so true.
And I really, really appreciated that. And I still get a chance to talk with Stop Gaze periodically and stuff through Facebook.
Oh, you do?
And I'm still connected with Faisal on a regular basis as well too. Good. And so I'm looking forward to trying to get back there. I don't know if traveling back there in 2022 is going to be a reality, but I talked to Jennifer that 2023 is probably realistic.
Oh,
as well as getting a chance to follow the footsteps of the Buddha and get a chance to see the school in Clementown as well too.
Right. But Jim, even, in those first days when I was first getting to know you in Ladakh, I mean, we had a wonderful group, but even among that group, I could see that your interest in the Himalayan culture, in the Tibetan culture was just palpable. And so I guess my next question that I wanted to ask was, what started this interest? What first sort of introduced or connected you to this culture and to this people?
Well, so part of it is that I see some parallels between the Tibetan people and the Native American community here in the US. And the way things have transpired through history is a lot of what the Tibetan people are going through is similar to what the Native American community has gone through here in the US.
True.
And I have a deep respect as I get to know Tibetan Buddhism a little bit more, is that for me, it's a much clearer path to finding a little bit of peace and harmony in my own life. Right. That's not readily available in the Western world.
True.
And the ancient, and that as far back as the culture goes is also of a deep interest to me as well too. And as I've gotten to know you and some of the people in Tibet is that I've embraced their struggle, and I think it's very important that the Tibetan culture, the Tibetan brand of Buddhism, and the Tibetan language are worthy of my time and worthy of my support. I think that it benefits humanity to continue to support the Tibetan people, because I think um, that the road to peace in the world is there's a great contribution that can come from Tibet and the Tibetan people.
True, Jim. And I sort of agree with you. When you said that, I was nodding in agreement and happiness, because I always, as a Tibetan, I feel that we truly have a wonderful spiritual heritage, something that is preserving, something that is sharing with friends like Jim and the wonderful circle that I have around TCF. And the next question I was going to ask, you sort of answered it in the preceding segment, but sometime after you came back from the Ladakh trip, you also became a TCF sponsor, and you now sponsor Siddharth, who is in the wonderful hostel at Clementown. I wanted to ask, and when you first became sponsor, I don't think you would be sitting trying to answer this question, but my next question is, what prompted you to join and become a sponsor?
So I understand the need that the children in Clementown have, and that because of the way things have worked out, your people, the Tibetan people, don't get nearly as much support as they're due. And I just realized that there's a lot I could, there's some things that I could do to actually help your people on the technical side, to find resources that would give the kids at Clementown, kind of not necessarily a step up, but would put them more on a parallel path to having some of the same resources that children in the West have.
Right.
And again, it really comes back to making sure that the Tibetan culture is fully supported as much as possible. One of the things here that, as I mentioned earlier, I see a parallel between the Native American experience here in the US and the Tibetan experience in Asia. And, unfortunately, here in the US and North America as a whole, is the Native communities, a lot of that spiritual heritage and traditions was lost.
Right.
And I think it's very important that we do everything we can to preserve the heritage of the Tibetan people. I think that in some circumstances here in the West, we've lost a great deal of what may or may not ever be recovered. And I think it's important that we use that as an example, that we do everything we can to help the Tibetan people to preserve their culture, to help to empower them, because I think that there's just so much that it has to offer, that the more that I learn about it, the deeper and richer my experience is.
Right.
And I think that by helping to preserve the heritage and the culture of Tibet, is that it may in some shape or form help us to rediscover aspects of the Native American culture that have been lost to us.
Yes. And so, Jim, just listening to you for me was so encouraging, especially the work that we do with the Tibetan Children's Education Foundation is closely tied to what you spoke. It's about raising awareness of Tibetan culture, trying our best in whatever way we can to preserve this culture, realizing its potential to touch people's lives. But again, in this answer, you sort of half answered a follow-up question that I had, because one of the remarkable thing is this, that from your side, you sense the potential of technology, computer, related technology, to make a really big difference in Tibetan children's education. And therefore, even from the get-go, you started to send me little iPads or little power chargers or whatever, little tech that you could lay your hands on. And I truly appreciated that, because, with TCF, we are also doing, bringing the internet and computers to the classes. At some level, we are thinking on the same wavelength. But with the person based there in Silicon Valley, can you tell me what technology and computer education can do for Tibetan refugee children?
Well, so one, I think that technology can help to enable not only the preservation of important aspects of the Tibetan culture, but then make it much easier to then distribute to not only Tibetans spread out around the world as well as Tibetan children, but also to other interested parties throughout the world. More and more, we're becoming a connected society, and there's both good and bad from that. And so my hope is that I can help to enable the good and the positive side of it, and find ways of making more technology readily available until we can develop more of the income streams that will allow for more up-to-date technology to be more readily available and stuff to the children of Tibet. Plus, as Tibetan children and students become more familiar with technology, it makes it easier for them then to engage other people, not only in India, but in the Western world as well, too, on a more equal footing. And I think that's more important than anything else, is that the children and students have access to technology, so that, again, it makes them easier not only to connect with the rest of the world and stuff, but also to have access to similar tools and resources, so that, again, the Tibetan heritage and culture has a much greater opportunity to prosper.
Absolutely. See, in some way, when you empower the Tibetan children and the Tibetan students in our lives right now, my best hope is this, that someday there will be manifold voices for Tibet. You know, right now we have Tibetans spread across, I don't know, many countries, 27, 28 at least. So young Tibetans, they're speaking different languages in Europe, in India, aided with technology and a passion for Tibet. I'm hoping that all of them can become voices for Tibet, just as you are with me today. But Jim, so with many of our TCF sponsors, I first sort of begin talking about the sponsorship program, and then in some way I expand the canvas to the larger question of support for Tibet as a whole. Tibet, this nation that has now been under occupation for the last 62 years. It's not that we don't have people who love and support us. You're a good example. But overall, I get the sense that every year we just fade away just that little bit more from global consciousness. If there's a flood, God forbid a virus, leave alone a virus like the COVID, even if there's a landslide or a flooding somewhere, understandably that gets more attention than, say, like the question of Tibet, which is 60 plus years old. But nevertheless, both you and I understand that the question of Tibet still lingers on. There are people in Tibet unhappy to the point where they're giving up their body in self-immolation, trying to say that everything is not okay in Tibet. So for folks like you and me sitting here in America wanting to support them, can you give me a sense of what can ordinary folks like Jim in California, Karma in Montana, what can we do to really help and support the Tibetan cause?
Well, so personally, I think that what we need to do is there's several folds and different ways to approach this. One is that I think it's most important to tie the Tibetan experience and show how closely it parallels the experience of Native Americans in this country. I mean, I think it's because what China is doing is the same damn thing that we did to the Native Americans. Is what they're doing is that they're displacing the Tibetan population, moving them into cities, so that then what they can do is go in and develop those areas either by putting up resorts or essentially tearing up the land and mining it for the precious metals that exist in the areas that were traditionally occupied by the Tibetan people. The same thing happened here in North America. Same thing to this day is that, and a good example is what took place with the Lakota Sioux, is that early treaties essentially granted them, from the government aspect, the possession of the Black Hills in South Dakota.
Okay.
Right up until they discovered gold there. And then at that point, then the government broke the treaty and then forcibly displaced the entire Lakota Nation off of that land. And there's still an ongoing treaty dispute that I think has been at least 100 years ongoing. But is that periodically the BBC is good about getting news out of that region. And you see that what China is doing was effectively the same thing, is that they're going in, moving those people out, saying that now that we put you in a city, you're you're not experiencing poverty. And then on the flip side of that coin, you hear about the fact now they're setting up a hotel and resort for Han Chinese to go on vacation, or they're looking at turning that area into a mining colony and, essentially, starting open pit mining in those areas. And so I think that from one standpoint, that's one of the areas that we need to focus on communicating to people in the West. And maybe not dragging in all the political polarization that comes, but really highlighting how the experience of the Tibetan people is so very similar to what Native Americans have gone through.
Right.
And then I think that I also believe strongly that people here in the West really need to focus on the country of origin where products are coming from. And so much, especially over COVID, I mean, the market has been flooded with Chinese products. Right. And oftentimes the only way you can bring attention to a political cause such as the Tibetan people is with your pocketbook. And it really comes down to just stopping the support of companies that purchase and manufacture their products in China that are then delivered overseas here. Right. And that's an extremely difficult shift for a lot of people to do, because so many of the products that we purchase here in the West have been outsourced to China for manufacturing.
True.
And that tends to, I'm sure that tends to irate or cause a lot of irritation for the Chinese government. But I think it's important that with everything that's going on in the world, we have to be very cognizant of where we're purchasing from, because by extension, we're supporting the Chinese government's efforts to essentially eliminate Tibet as a country. We're, by extension to the products that we're purchasing from China, we're essentially advocating what they're doing. And we really I think it's important that we take a stand. We can't be hypocritical in our purchasing power, that we don't take the time to recognize that what we're doing and where we're buying from is having an impact in a negative sense on the rest of the world.
Right. So true, Jim. I really want to thank you for those powerful words for Tibet, Jim. And I also wanted to tell anyone tuning in to this program that part of our hope in doing the Voices is to inspire other people who have so far not been a part of the TCF team or who are not part of any Tibet support groups. My hope is that watching programs like Voices for Tibet will inspire you to become a Tibetan supporter. And for the Tibetans, I know that as a Tibetan, I've often despaired, I've lost hope, thinking that not many folks no longer care about us. But listening to voices like my friend Jim Patton, I hope that if you're a Tibetan tuning in, it will also give you hope, knowing that we have genuine friends who feel for us and who empathize for us and who support the Tibetan cause. So Jim, thank you again, putting my hands together in gratitude. Thank you for being a Tibetan supporter, and thank you for being a voice for Tibet today.
You're welcome. It's great to see you, my friend. I look forward to seeing you again soon.